All right, welcome back to interesting stuff. It's the Homeschool Education Supplement where we dive into a topic that perhaps will be something new for you. And today we are looking at the Oregon Trail. Now, it was very important for the governing powers at the time. The time we're talking about here is just after the year 1800. It was very important for the powers at the time to increase their territories, and if people could be persuaded to live across the United States in different areas, there would be a very large tax base of people who could be used to fund the dreams of the European empires. Of course, in the history books, they won't tell you it was all about money. They'll tell you it was all about adventure. And, that's partly true. So let's take a little look at how this whole expansion of culture and migration happened. And so one of the greatest natural barriers to American westward expansion existed in the form of the Rocky Mountains. This is a range which runs for 3,000 miles from Alaska down to central New Mexico and rises to 4,399 meters. And although the Rockies had been crossed in 1805, the opening up of the far west of the United States would never go far without a viable and sensible route for wagons to transport people and goods. And it was obvious at the time that this would involve a considerable amount of work, especially as the Spanish friars who built the first road across the similarly inhospitable Sierra Nevada had found in 1775 when they had to cut a stairway into the sheer rock. Anyway, one of the targets of this great pioneering drive to the west was the rich Oregon Territory on the northwestern seaboard. The lure was cheap land and the hope of being able to build a new, perhaps even more peaceful civilization. The propagandists of the time advertised that there was a level, open trail that was good for carriages. And shrewd utopians such as the American Society for Encouraging the Settlement of Oregon Territory bought up land to sell to settlers with the promise of a city of perfection. So as always, you have to be a little bit aware of the fact that the marketing people always oversell their products. Nothing has changed. In addition, misleading maps were available, which suggested that there was an easy river passage from the Great Salt Lake along non-existent waterways. Now, if you're getting a bit lost at this point and not sure where we are, now is the time to get out a map and look at the United States and see if you can spot where the Oregon Trail is on there. And for reference, you should find that it began in Missouri, near the east coast, and ran all the way in a northwestward path right up to the state that we know as Oregon. So, despite the over-optimistic pronouncements, a party of fur traders actually stumbled on a pass through the mountains that could actually be a vital link. It was initially entitled the Southern Pass and was a fairly flat plain about 20 miles wide around the Wind River Range in Wyoming. However, it remained a secret until 1824 when Crow Indians showed it on a deerskin map and a sand pile map to a fur trapper and local explorer called Jedediah Smith. Despite this information being available, it was 10 years before the first trading wagons were led through the Southern Pass, around the year of 1832. But these wagons without iron axles were simply too fragile for the unbroken trails that were here. The climate itself was also arid, and from the writings at that time, one missionary's wife wrote that the heavens over us were of brass and the earth of iron under our feet, and the dried spokes sprang out of place on the wagons, and the iron rims slipped off the shrunken wheels far too easily. One solution to the problem was to remove the iron rims and enlarge the wheels by nailing on extra pieces of wood, or tying them onto rawhide cords. A sort of early form of snow wheel or chain wheel, I suppose. Wagons also had to be manhandled up steep climbs and then lowered down cliff faces with ropes, a feat which might take 80 men to move one wagon. And in addition to that, there were also large ravines that had to be filled with rubble before they could be crossed. So maybe you can imagine these were some hardy people traveling from east to west. Around the year of 1840, a party of missionaries hired a trapper, Robert Newell, to lead them and their wagons from Green River on the western edge of the Rockies over the mountains to Fort Vancouver on the Willamette River. The party left Green River on September the 27th of 1840 and traveled as far as they could in the wagons, clearing a road as they went. When they could get no further, they shifted their goods to pack horses, and the wagons were stripped to the chassis. Eventually, one was broken up to make spares for the other. When they finally reached Fort Walla Walla, which is now in Washington State, Newell built a barge and hauled the remaining wagon along the Columbia River to the mouth of the Willamette. This journey was the first recorded migration of the 2,000-mile trail from Independence, Missouri, to Oregon County. Newell was jubilant, if slightly incorrect, when he wrote in his journal in 1841 that I, Robert Newell, was the first who brought wagons across the Rocky Mountains. But then, we all like to be first, right? And you can imagine that at that time, there wasn't a lot of information about what everybody was doing. So perhaps we can forgive him that little misdemeanor. The very first large train of settlers to complete the trail from Independence to Fort Vancouver passed through the South Pass in 1841. It's interesting that all these forts were around at the time. It shows you how dangerous a period this was in history. Anyway, the large train of settlers was led by Elijah White with Thomas Brokenhand Fitzpatrick, a longtime companion of the aforementioned Jebediah Smith. And as with Newell's party, the settlers switched to pack horses and abandoned their wagons. But it was not long before an annual trek of settlers was making the long journey along the Oregon Trail, as it soon became known. The wagon trains, which followed in 1842, were known as the Great Migration. It was powered across the mountains by sheer weight of numbers, with a complement of 1,000 people, 200 families in 200 wagons, pulled by 694 oxen. There was manpower enough to keep the Indians at bay and to cope with all the terrain. And it's interesting that they used oxen to pull the wagons and not horses. The giant trek took place between April and October to avoid the winter snow in the mountains and slushy spring weather on the plains, and was the first to use wagons all the way from start to finish. And as you can imagine, in this harsh land, also beautiful land, but very harsh, and this really, really hard climate, that you really had to have a bunch of hardy people who would set out to make the journey, including mothers with children as well. So it was really difficult for these people. And also amongst the people of the time, this path, the Oregon Trail, was also known as the Corridor of Gravestones, which tells you quite a lot. So Once over the Rockies, whether in Oregon country or turning left and going to Mexican California, the settlers claimed their land, planted the seeds and young fruit trees they had brought with them, and they also built log cabins. Between 1846 and 1848, the Mexican War led to the United States annexing the states of California and New Mexico, a move which encouraged even yet more settlers. Of course, at the same time as all this was happening, we had the California gold rush promising people that if they traveled there, they would get rich. And so you can imagine what kind of people were attracted to that as well. So traveling along the dangerous route, the people were all too aware of the sacrifices of previous pioneers. It was a trail marked by gravestones and memorial stones from one end to the other. And migrants that people encountered often told stories of cattle that were driven off by wolves, of oxen that were scattered all over the hills, and of men slaughtered by the Pawnee and horses seized by the Dakota. And it was not just man, that was man's enemy, disease, and accident also took more lives than any Indians ever did. However, the Oregon Trail eventually saw that the West was conquered. But for many, it was not conquered without a high price that had to be paid. And so if we look around at the world today, I think we can feel that we're blessed and lucky to be able to have roads that travel almost anywhere, to be able to use bridges, to be able to sail in ships, to be able to fly in planes. We've got a lot to be really thankful for. And sometimes it's nice to remember the struggles of the past and realize, as I always say, that we stand on the shoulders of giants. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found something new in here. As always, there will be comprehension questions under the video to check your understanding. And if you want a different topic, just drop a line and let me know. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I wish you a fantastic day. Take care.